Emily Matthews was just a waitress and single mom struggling to make ends meet in a small-town diner, her dreams of becoming a nurse long abandoned. When an elderly veteran collapsed at table 4, her instincts took over as she fought to save his life. What seemed like a random act of kindness quickly took an unexpected turn. Within hours, government vehicles lined the street and officials with classified files appeared at the diner's door. Emily would soon discover that her simple compassion had far-reaching consequences beyond anything she could have imagined, and that the stranger at table 4 would change the course of her life in ways no one could have predicted. Emily Matthews arrived at Rosie's diner at 5:30 a.m., the same way she had for the past 7 years. The neon sign flickered against the dark morning sky as she fumbled with her keys, balancing her worn purse and a thermos of coffee. Inside, the familiar scent of yesterday's grease and fresh coffee grounds welcomed her like an old friend. Another early one, M, called Joe, the aging cook who was already firing up the grill. His weathered hands moved with practiced precision, the same hands that had taught Emily how to properly flip pancakes on her first day. "Tyler's got a fever," Emily replied, tying her apron with swift, practiced movements. "Had to get Mrs. Henderson from next door to watch him." She glanced at her phone, checking for messages. Nothing yet. Her son was usually still asleep at this hour, curled up with his favorite dinosaur blanket, his forehead warm, but not dangerously so. The diner was Emily's lifeline, not just the modest paycheck that barely covered rent for their small 2-bedroom apartment, but the routine, the purpose, the community that had embraced her when Tyler's father walked out 6 years ago. The regulars knew her story. They left generous tips when they could, slipped her drawings for that smart boy of yours, and occasionally sent home leftover pie. The morning rush began promptly at 6:15. Emily moved between tables with graceful efficiency, balancing plates of eggs and pancakes along her arm, remembering who needed extra napkins and who wanted their coffee black. Her smile never wavered, even as her phone vibrated in her pocket. During a brief lull, Emily ducked into the storage room, fishing out her phone with trembling fingers. "Mom, I don't feel good. Stomach hurts. When are you coming home?" Emily closed her eyes for a moment, steadying herself against the shelves of canned tomatoes and pickle jars. She quickly typed back, "Medicine is on your nightstand. Take one with water. I'll call at my break. Love you, buddy." 3 more hours until her break. 3 more hours of pouring coffee and taking orders while her mind was across town with her feverish 9-year-old. Mrs. Henderson was kind but elderly. She couldn't be expected to tend to a sick child all day. The bell above the door chimed, and Emily tucked her phone away, plastering on her professional smile. A group of construction workers filed in, dusty boots and tired eyes, seeking fuel for the day ahead. "Morning, gentlemen," Emily said, distributing menus with practiced ease. "Coffee all around?" As she worked, Emily calculated bills in her head. Tyler's medication had cost extra this month. The electric bill was due on Friday. Her car had made that worrying sound again yesterday. Each mental tally chipped away at her smile, though it never quite disappeared. Her regulars noticed the shadows under her eyes, the way she checked her phone whenever she thought no one was looking. Mr. Peterson, a retired teacher who came in every Thursday for blueberry pancakes, left a $20 tip on a $12 bill. "For the boy," he murmured as he left, patting her hand with grandfatherly affection. By mid-morning, the diner quieted. Emily leaned against the counter, finally allowing her shoulders to drop from their perfect posture. Her feet ached, her worry for Tyler gnawed at her. 3 tables still needed clearing, and the ketchup bottles needed refilling before the lunch crowd arrived. But for now, with her apron stained and her smile finally resting, Emily Matthews was just a mother, staring at a photo of her son on her phone's background, counting the hours until she could go home and hold him close. The weight of her responsibilities hung heavy, but her determination shone brighter, a silent promise to the child who depended on her for everything. The lunch rush had finally subsided, leaving Rosie's diner in that peaceful lull between the clamor of noon and the steady trickle of afternoon regulars. Emily wiped down the counter with practiced strokes, her thoughts drifting to Tyler. His fever had broken, according to Mrs. Henderson's latest text, but the worry lingered in Emily's heart like a shadow. The bell above the door chimed, pulling Emily from her thoughts. A tall, elderly man stood in the entrance, his posture straight despite his years. His weathered face spoke of decades under harsh suns, while his eyes, clear blue, but somehow distant, surveyed the diner with quiet assessment. A faded military jacket hung from his broad shoulders, decorated with patches that had lost their vibrance but none of their meaning. "Seat yourself anywhere," Emily called, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. The man nodded silently and made his way to table 4, the one by the large window overlooking Main Street. There was something in his measured steps that commanded attention without seeking it. Emily approached with a menu and her professional smile. "Coffee to start?" "Black," he replied, his voice a low rumble like distant thunder. "Just black." He didn't look up at her, his gaze fixed instead on the passers-by outside the window, as if searching for a face he feared he might never see again. When Emily returned with his coffee, the man had removed his jacket, revealing a simple white button-up shirt that had seen better days. A small medallion hung from a chain around his neck, occasionally catching the light when he moved. "Ready to order?" she asked, pen poised above her notepad. "Meatloaf special," he said, still not meeting her eyes. His hands, strong but trembling slightly, wrapped around the coffee mug as if seeking warmth rather than refreshment. Throughout her shift, Emily found her attention repeatedly drawn to table 4. The man had barely touched his food, methodically cutting small pieces only to push them around the plate. His coffee cup, however, had been refilled 3 times. Each time Emily approached with the pot, he acknowledged her with nothing more than a slight nod. "Everything all right with your meal, sir?" she finally asked, concern overtaking professional distance. The man looked up then, truly seeing her for the first time. Something in his eyes shifted, recognition, not of her face, but perhaps of her kindness. "Fine, thank you," he said, his voice softer now. "Just not as hungry as I thought." Emily noticed a small photograph peeking out from beneath. His napkin, a faded image of young soldiers standing shoulder to shoulder, desert sand stretching behind them. Before she could look away, the man gently covered it with his hand. "Today marks 30 years, he said unexpectedly, the words seeming to surprise even him. He didn't elaborate, and Emily didn't ask. Some wounds she knew were too deep for. Casual conversation. As the afternoon stretched on, the man remained at table 4, ordering nothing more than coffee. Through the window, dark clouds gathered on the horizon, promising rain. The diner emptied as people hurried home ahead of the storm. But the stranger stayed, his silhouette a solitary figure against the growing darkness outside. When Emily's shift ended at 4, the man was still there, his coffee long cold, his eyes fixed on memories only he could see. She hesitated by the register, watching him. There was something in his solitude that seemed too heavy to bear alone. A quiet dignity mixed with unspoken pain that made her heart ache in a way she couldn't quite understand. What Emily couldn't know as she untied her apron and prepared to rush home to Tyler was that the stranger at table 4 would soon become far more than just another customer passing through her small-town life. The afternoon storm had arrived in force, rain drumming against the windows of Rosie's diner like impatient fingers. Emily had just refilled the elderly veteran's coffee for the 5th time when her phone buzzed. Tyler's fever had returned. Mrs. Henderson sounded worried. Emily glanced at the clock. Just 40 more minutes until her shift ended. A crash of thunder shook the building and the lights flickered momentarily. When they stabilized, Emily noticed the veteran's face had changed. His weathered features had taken on an ashen hue, beads of sweat forming along his hairline despite the diner's persistent chill. "Sir, are you feeling all right?" Emily approached. Table 4, dish towel still in hand. The man opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. Instead, his eyes widened with sudden alarm. A look Emily had seen only once before, when her grandfather realized something was terribly wrong moments before his stroke. The veteran's hand moved toward his chest, clutching at his faded shirt. With desperate fingers, "Sir?" Emily's voice rose in concern. Time seemed to slow as the man's body went rigid. His coffee mug tipped, dark liquid spreading across the worn table like spilled ink. Then, with a terrible finality, he slid sideways out of the booth and collapsed onto the linoleum floor. "Joe, call 911!" Emily's voice cut through the diner's ambient noise like a siren. She was already moving, knees hitting the floor beside the fallen soldier before her conscious mind had fully processed what was happening. The training from her community college nursing courses, classes she'd had to abandon when Tyler got sick and money ran tight, surged back with crystal clarity. "Everyone back, please! Give him air!" Emily commanded, hands already checking for a pulse at the man's neck. Nothing. His skin felt cool and clammy beneath her fingertips. With decisive movements, Emily shoved table 4 aside, the screech of metal against tile punctuating the sudden silence that had fallen over the diner. She positioned the man flat on his back, tilted his head, and checked his airway. "Is he—" Joe had appeared beside her, phone in hand. "No pulse," Emily replied, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Ambulance? 8 minutes out." 8 minutes. Too long. Emily positioned herself over the veteran's chest, interlaced her fingers, and began compressions. The methodical rhythm, hard and fast, sent pain shooting through her wrists, but she didn't falter. "Come on," she whispered between measured breaths into the man's still mouth. "Stay with us, soldier." Rain continued to lash against the windows as Emily fought death with nothing but her hands and determination. The other customers had formed a solemn circle, faces drawn with concern. Someone, the teenage girl from the corner booth, was crying softly. 4 minutes in, Emily's arms burned with exhaustion. Sweat dripped from her forehead onto the veteran's still face. "Someone take over," she gasped, but before anyone could step forward, the man's chest suddenly heaved on its own. A collective breath seemed to sweep through the diner as the veteran coughed weakly, his eyelids fluttering. Emily rolled him carefully onto his side, recovery position automatic in her movements. "You're okay," she soothed, though she knew they were far from out of danger. "Help is coming. Just stay with me." The veteran's eyes found hers, confusion, giving way to something else. Recognition, perhaps, or gratitude. His lips moved, forming words too quiet to hear. Emily leaned closer. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the storm outside. His trembling hand sought hers, squeezing with surprising strength when he found it. In the distance, sirens wailed, drawing closer. Emily held the veteran's gaze, anchoring him to the world with nothing but her presence and the warm pressure of her hand in his. Behind her, she heard Joe explaining to the other customers that the diner would be closing early. "My son," Emily said suddenly, remembering Tyler's fever with a pang of guilt. But as the paramedics burst through the door, equipment in hand, she didn't move from the veteran's side. Some duties, she realized, transcended even a mother's urgent worry. Some moments demanded witness, and something told Emily that this moment, with this stranger whose life balanced on a knife's edge, would change everything. The paramedics burst through the diner door in a flurry of purpose and equipment, rainwater glistening on their dark uniforms, The lead EMT, a young woman with determined eyes, took in the scene with practiced efficiency. Emily, kneeling beside the elderly veteran, her hands steady, despite the tremors of exhaustion running through her arms. "Ma'am, we'll take it from here," the paramedic said, crouching opposite Emily. "Can you tell me what happened?" Emily moved aside, her voice remarkably calm as she recounted the collapse, the missing pulse, the CPR. Professional words from her. Abandoned nursing courses flowed naturally. Possible cardiac event. Approximately 6 minutes without pulse, regained consciousness briefly after compressions. The veteran's eyes had closed again, but his chest rose and fell with shallow yet persistent breaths. A small victory against the looming shadow of mortality. "You kept him alive," the paramedic said, glancing up briefly from attaching monitoring equipment. The words were matter-of-fact, but the respect in her eyes spoke volumes. Not everyone would have known what to do. The second paramedic, older, with salt and pepper hair, worked with quiet efficiency, establishing an IV line with practiced hands. "BP's dropping again," he muttered. Emily watched as they moved the veteran onto a stretcher, his military jacket folded carefully beside him. The medallion she'd noticed earlier had slipped free during the commotion, dangling now against the stark white of the emergency blanket. A purple heart, its purple ribbon faded but unmistakable. "He was awarded that in Vietnam," said a gravelly voice behind her. Mr. Peterson, the retired history teacher, stood clutching his hat, rain dripping. From its brim, I recognized the year on it. He must have been at Khe Sanh. Outside, the storm had intensified, sheets of rain turning the world beyond the diner windows into a grey blur. Lightning flashed, illuminating the ambulance waiting with open doors. The paramedics prepared to move the veteran, securing equipment and covering him against the downpour. Emily's phone buzzed again in her pocket. Mrs. Henderson, undoubtedly wondering where she was. Tyler needed her. Her shift had technically ended 10 minutes ago, yet something kept her rooted to the spot, watching as the stranger who'd sat for hours at table 4 fought for his life. "Ma'am?" The female paramedic was looking at her expectantly. "Did you find any identification? Next of kin information?" Emily shook her head, then remembered the photograph. There was a picture under his napkin. The image was still there, partially stained with spilled coffee. Emily carefully retrieved it, noting the names scrawled on the back in fading ink. 2nd Battalion F Company, 1971. Below that, a single name stood out. James Sullivan. His name might be James, Emily offered, handling the photograph carefully to the paramedic. "I don't know about family." The veteran's eyes fluttered open once more as they prepared to wheel him out. For a brief moment, confusion clouded his gaze before settling on Emily. Recognition dawned, followed by something deeper, a wordless connection forged in crisis. "You'll be okay," Emily assured him, surprising herself by reaching for his hand. "They're taking good care of you." His fingers tightened weakly around hers. "Emily," he whispered, having obviously read her name tag. "Thank you." The words cost him visible effort, each syllable a battle against pain and weakness. Then they were moving, whisking him through the rain toward the waiting ambulance. Emily stood in the doorway, watching until the red taillights disappeared into the storm's grey curtain. Behind her, the diner had fallen into an unusual quiet. Joe was already cleaning table 4, wiping away coffee stains and straightening chairs. As if erasing evidence of the drama that had unfolded, the remaining customers spoke in hushed tones, casting occasional glances her way. Emily checked her phone. 3 missed calls from Mrs. Henderson. Tyler needed her, and she needed to go home. Yet as she untied her apron and gathered her things, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something had fundamentally shifted in her world, that the veteran named James Sullivan had entered her life for a reason that had yet to reveal itself. What she couldn't know, as she hurried through the rain toward her car, was that the hospital where they had taken him was about to make a discovery that would change both their lives forever. The ambulance's sirens faded into the distance, leaving behind a strange, hollow silence at Rosie's diner. Rain continued to drum against the windows, but the sound seemed muted now, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Emily stood motionless by the door, her uniform spattered with coffee and the invisible marks of a stranger's struggle for life. "You should sit down, honey." Maggie, the weekend manager who'd arrived during the commotion, gently touched Emily's shoulder. "I'll get you some water." Emily nodded mechanically, her body moving without conscious direction to the nearest stool. The adrenaline that had carried her through the crisis was beginning to ebb, leaving her hands trembling and her knees unsteady. Her phone buzzed again, Mrs. Henderson undoubtedly frantic about Tyler by now. "I need to call about my son," Emily managed, her voice sounding strangely distant to her own ears. The conversation was brief. Tyler's fever had stabilized. Mrs. Henderson's nephew had come over to help. They could manage another hour if needed. Emily promised to be home soon, disconnecting with a mixture of relief and lingering worry. Around her, the diner was returning to its regular rhythm with unsettling speed. Joe wiped down the counter with methodical strokes. The teenage waitress, who covered weekends, was already seating new customers who'd arrived, oblivious to the drama they'd just missed. Table 4 had been reset, all evidence of the veteran's collapse erased, save for the lingering scent of spilled coffee. "Take your break now," Maggie insisted, pressing a glass of water into Emily's hands. "We've got this covered." Emily didn't argue. Her legs carried her through the kitchen, past the concerned glances of the staff, and out the back door to the narrow alley behind the diner. The rain had gentled to a soft mist that settled cool against her flushed face. For a moment, she simply stood there, breathing in the damp air. Then, without warning, her composure cracked. The first sob escaped without sound, a violent shudder that bent her forward like a physical blow. The second came with tears that mingled with raindrops on her cheeks. Emily leaned against the brick wall, sliding down until she sat on the overturned milk crate that served as the staff's unofficial smoking spot. Her hands, the same hands that had just performed CPR, that had just helped save a life, now trembled uncontrollably in her lap. "He could have died," she whispered to the empty alley, "right there at table 4. The weight of that reality pressed down on her chest. For 7 years, Emily had poured coffee and served meatloaf specials in that diner. She'd smiled through migraines, worked through fevers of her own, balanced plates while calculating how to stretch her paycheck to cover Tyler's growing needs. Always moving, always planning, always navigating the narrow margins of their precarious life. Today, for the first time, life and death had balanced on her fingertips. Emily closed her eyes, remembering the veteran's face, the distant gaze that had suddenly focused on her with such clarity in those moments after she'd revived him. The way he'd said her name, as if committing it to memory. The Purple Heart medallion against his chest, evidence of another life and death moment decades before. Her phone chimed with a text from Tyler. "Are you okay, Mom? Mrs. H says something happened at work." Even now, her 9-year-old was worrying about her instead of his own fever. Emily wiped her tears with the back of her hand, drawing a deep, steadying breath. The trembling in her fingers began to subside. "I'm fine, buddy," she typed back. "Just a busy day. Be home soon with chicken soup. Love you." Standing, Emily straightened her uniform and pushed her hair back from her face. The emotional storm had passed, leaving behind a strange clarity. For years, she had set aside her dreams of becoming a nurse when life's demands had proven too much. Yet today, those abandoned skills had made all the difference for a stranger. As she turned to go back inside, Emily couldn't know that, across town, in the emergency room of County General Hospital, James Sullivan was asking for her by name, or that the hospital director was already making a phone call that would send ripples through her carefully balanced world. Emily's shift ended at last, the clock above the diner's entrance showing 5:15. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving behind puddles that reflected the emerging evening sky in fractured pieces. She gathered her purse and jacket, body heavy with fatigue but mind racing with the day's events. "Emily, there's a call for you," Joe called from behind the counter, holding the diner's landline with a puzzled expression. "Line 2. "For me?" Emily frowned. Nobody ever called her at work except Mrs. Henderson, and she always called Emily's cell. "Did they say who it is?" Joe shrugged, handing her the receiver. Some woman sounded official. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Emily pressed the phone to her ear. "Hello? This is Emily." "Am I speaking with Emily Matthews?" The woman's voice was crisp, professional, with the measured cadence of someone reading from a script or checklist. "Yes, that's me." Emily leaned against the counter, a subtle unease settling in her stomach. "Who is this?" "This is Sandra Wilkins from County General Hospital Administration." A brief pause, papers shuffling. "I understand you performed emergency CPR on a patient earlier today at Rosie's Diner. Is that correct?" The image of the veteran's ashen face flashed through Emily's mind. "Yes, that's right." Is he all right?" The administrator didn't answer her question. Instead, her voice took on a more formal tone. "I need to verify your full legal name and current address for our records, please." Emily hesitated, glancing around the now quiet diner. Maggie was counting the register drawer. The weekend waitress was refilling salt shakers. Everything appeared normal, yet something in the administrator's tone set off warning bells. "May I ask why you need this information?" Emily twisted the phone cord between her fingers, an old nervous habit from childhood. It's standard procedure in cases involving emergency medical intervention by civilians. The answer came too quickly, too rehearsed. "We need to complete our incident documentation." Emily provided her name, but deflected on her address. "Can you tell me how the patient is doing? His name is James, I think. James Sullivan." Another pause, longer this time. "I'm not at liberty to discuss patient information." The administrator's voice had cooled noticeably. "Ms. Matthews, I need to advise you not to leave the area for the next 24 hours. The hospital director needs to speak with you regarding this incident." Emily's grip tightened on the receiver. "Leave the area? I don't understand. Why would I need to speak with the director? I'm not authorized to provide those details." The administrator's tone was final. "Just remain available. We have your work number and we'll be in touch." The line went dead before Emily could respond, leaving her staring at the receiver in confusion. Joe raised an eyebrow questioningly as she returned the phone to its cradle. "Everything okay?" he asked, wiping down the coffee machine with slow, careful movements. "I'm not sure," Emily admitted, her thoughts spinning. Hospital administrators didn't normally track down Good Samaritans. Directors didn't typically need to speak with diner waitresses who performed CPR. None of it made sense. Her phone buzzed, a text from Mrs. Henderson. "Tyler asking for you." Feeling worse again, Emily grabbed her jacket, sudden urgency overtaking her confusion. Her son needed her. Whatever strange bureaucratic process the hospital was following could wait until tomorrow. As she pushed open the diner door, the evening air cool against her face, Emily couldn't shake the administrator's words, "Don't leave the area." It wasn't just the instruction that bothered her. It was the tone, not a request, a warning. In the parking lot, Emily fumbled with her keys, the events of the day pressing down like a physical weight. The veteran's collapsed form, the rhythm of compressions beneath her palms, his whispered thanks, and now this cryptic call. What she couldn't know, as she started her aging car and pulled onto Main Street, was that 3 blocks away, a black sedan with government plates was idling at a red light, and the man in the passenger seat was holding a file with her name on it. Something had been set in motion at Table 4 today, something far larger than a medical emergency in a small-town diner. And Emily Matthews, single mother and waitress, was now at the center of it. The evening shift at Rosie's Diner had settled into its comfortable rhythm. Maggie supervised from behind the counter. The weekend waitress navigated between tables with practiced ease, and Joe's spatula created a metallic symphony against the grill. The strange events of the afternoon, the veteran's collapse, Emily's life-saving intervention, the cryptic call from the hospital, had already begun to fade into the background, becoming just another story in the diner's long history. Until the lights appeared. It began with a flash of blue and red, reflecting off the front windows, subtle at first, easily mistaken for passing traffic. Then another, and another, until the entire diner was awash in pulsating color. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Every head turned toward the large front windows. "What in God's name?" Joe muttered, stepping out from behind the grill, wiping his hands on his apron. Outside, Main Street had transformed. Where there had been normal small-town evening traffic just moments before, now stood a line of vehicles that stretched as far as the eye could see. Ambulances, with their distinctive white and orange markings, police cruisers, and sleek black government SUVs with tinted windows. At least 10 emergency vehicles, probably more, their emergency lights spinning in silent warning. No sirens wailed, no officials shouted orders, just the quiet, orderly occupation of Main Street by a convoy that had appeared as suddenly as summer. "Lightning! They've blocked off the whole street," whispered the teenage waitress, her face pressed against the glass. "Look, barricades at both ends." Indeed, uniformed officers were setting up barriers at the intersections, diverting traffic away from the scene. Pedestrians gathered at the edges, cell phones raised to capture whatever was unfolding. Some pointed directly at Rosie's Diner, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Should we call someone?" Maggie asked, though it wasn't clear who might be left to call when half the town's emergency services appeared to be parked outside. As if in answer, the diner's phone rang, a shrill, insistent sound that cut through the stunned silence. Joe reached for it with a hesitant hand, as if it might burn him. "Rosie's," he answered, then fell silent, listening. His weathered face grew increasingly puzzled. "Yes, she was. About an hour ago. I don't understand what this—" He stopped, looking at the receiver. They hung up. "Who was it?" Maggie demanded, her normally unflappable demeanor cracking. "Hospital again," Joe said. "Asking about Emily." Outside, a ripple moved through the assembled vehicles. Doors opened simultaneously, a choreographed movement that sent a chill through the diner's occupants. Men and women in uniforms, some medical, some military, some unidentifiable, emerged and formed a precise line along the sidewalk. From the central vehicle, a black SUV with no markings, stepped a tall figure in a tailored suit. Even from a distance, his bearing commanded attention. He surveyed the diner with calculated precision before speaking into a handheld radio. The crowd of onlookers had grown, their murmurs creating a low buzz of speculation. Some were locals who had known Rosie's Diner their entire lives. Others were just passing through, caught in the unexpected drama of a small-town evening turned. "Extraordinary. It's like something out of a movie," the teenage waitress whispered, still transfixed by the scene outside. But this was no movie. This was Main Street, transformed into the stage for something none of them understood. And at the center of it all, though she wasn't even present, was Emily Matthews, the waitress who had saved a veteran's life at Table 4 just hours earlier. Inside the diner, Maggie reached for the phone again, her fingers trembling slightly as she dialed. When Emily's voicemail answered, Maggie's message was brief but urgent. "Emily, don't come back to the diner. Something's happening. There are government vehicles everywhere asking for you. Call me when you get this." What none of them could know was that Emily's phone lay silenced on her bedside table as she tended to her feverish son, or that the convoy outside was just the beginning of a chain of events that would forever alter the quiet trajectory of her carefully managed life. Emily arrived at Rosie's diner the next morning, sleep-deprived and anxious. Tyler's fever had finally broken near dawn, allowing her a few precious hours of rest before her shift. The messages from Maggie, 5 in total, each more urgent than the last, had gone unheard until she'd checked her phone at 5 a.m. By then, according to Maggie's final update, the mysterious convoy had dispersed, leaving behind nothing but questions and wild town speculation. The diner appeared normal as Emily parked her car, though she couldn't help noticing 2 men in dark suits standing near the entrance, conferring in low voices. Her stomach tightened. Something told her they weren't there for the blueberry pancakes. Emily Matthews. One of the men approached as she stepped out of her car, his voice quiet but carrying an unmistakable authority. "I'm Agent Daniel Harmon. We need to speak with you." Inside, Rosie's had been cleared of customers. Joe stood awkwardly by the grill, pretending to clean, while obviously straining to overhear. Maggie sat at the counter, her face tense with concern. At table 4, the veterans' table, sat an older man in a military uniform adorned with enough medals to suggest significant rank. "Please sit down," the uniformed man said, rising slightly as Emily approached. His voice was gentle yet commanding, his eyes sharp beneath steel-grey eyebrows. "I'm General Robert Westfield. Thank you for joining us." Emily slid into the booth across from him, acutely aware of Agent Harmon standing nearby, his posture vigilant. "Am I in some kind of trouble?" she asked directly, too exhausted for pretense. The general's weathered face softened. "Quite the contrary, Ms. Matthews. You've done your country a service greater than you know." He placed a folder on the table, his fingers resting lightly atop it. "The man whose life you saved yesterday, James Sullivan, is not just a Vietnam veteran." "Then who is he?" Emily asked, her mind racing with possibilities. "Sullivan is a participant in a classified military medical program," the general explained, his voice lowered. "A groundbreaking treatment for severe PTSD using specialized neural therapy. He's one of 12 veterans selected for the trial, all former special forces, all suffering from treatment-resistant trauma." Emily tried to process this information. "So the collapse was a severe reaction to the experimental medication," General Westfield confirmed. "Sullivan went missing from the research facility 3 days ago. We've had teams searching for him since. He wasn't supposed to leave the compound. The treatment makes patients vulnerable to exactly the kind of cardiac event you witnessed." The weight of understanding settled over Emily. "If I hadn't been there, we would have lost not only a decorated veteran, but potentially the entire program," the general finished. "Sullivan's neural patterns during treatment are providing our researchers with crucial data that could eventually help thousands of veterans. His disappearance nearly derailed years of work." Agent Harmon stepped forward. "When Sullivan was admitted to County General yesterday, his blood work triggered our security protocols. That's when we discovered what happened here and your role in saving him." "The convoy last night?" Emily asked. "Medical transport for Sullivan plus security," the general explained. "The program remains classified at the highest levels. We needed to extract him quickly and secure the area." Emily glanced at table 4, reimagining yesterday's events with this new understanding. Not just an elderly veteran having a medical emergency, but a special forces soldier carrying classified neural treatment in his system. A man whose survival might help countless others struggling with the invisible wounds of war. Sullivan asked for you, the general said, interrupting her thoughts. Before we transported him back to the facility, he was quite insistent. Emily met the general's gaze. Is he going to be okay? Thanks to you, yes. The general opened the E folder, removing an official-looking document, which brings me to the purpose of our meeting. The Department of Defense would like to extend its formal gratitude for your actions. The document slid across the table toward her, a commendation, with the presidential seal embossed at the top. Below it lay something else, a check with more zeros than Emily had ever seen on a single piece of paper. For medical school, the general said softly, noting her shocked expression. Sullivan mentioned you were once in nursing courses. He thought, perhaps your ambitions deserved a second chance. Outside, the morning sun broke through the clouds, casting a golden light through the diner windows. Emily stared at the check, at the future suddenly unfolding before her. At table 4, a simple act of kindness had rippled outward, touching lives she didn't even know existed, including, most unexpectedly, her own. Word spread through town like wildfire, carried on the winds of text messages, phone calls, and breathless conversations across fences and grocery store aisles. By noon, a crowd had begun to gather outside Rosie's diner. First a handful of curious onlookers, then dozens, until Main Street hummed with anticipation. Emily watched it all unfold from behind the counter, her hands moving through familiar motions, pouring coffee, wiping surfaces, arranging silverware, while her mind struggled to process the morning's revelations. The check from the Department of Defense remained in her purse, a tangible promise of possibilities she had long ago forced herself to abandon. You should go home and change, Maggie insisted, eyeing Emily's coffee-stained uniform. They're setting up a podium outside. The mayor's coming. The mayor? Emily's voice rose in disbelief. For what? As if in answer, the bell above the door chimed. A woman in a crisp blue suit entered, flanked by 2 assistants clutching tablets and phones. Mayor Richardson, a formidable figure even in a town this small, surveyed the diner with practiced political precision before her gaze settled on Emily. There she is, the mayor announced, crossing the room with her hand extended. The hero of the hour. I just got off the phone with the VA director and 3 news stations. They'll be here within the hour. Emily shook the mayor's hand automatically, her mind racing. Ma'am, I really don't think— Nonsense, Mayor Richardson interrupted, her campaign trail smile firmly in place. What you did wasn't just saving a life, though heaven knows that's enough. According to the general, you've contributed to a program that could help thousands of our veterans. This town is going to celebrate you properly. Outside, workers were already erecting a small stage on the sidewalk. A van bearing the logo of the regional news network had parked across the street, a reporter checking her reflection in its tinted windows. I need to call my son, Emily said, suddenly remembering Tyler. He's been sick, already taken care of, Joe called from the kitchen. Mrs. Henderson's bringing him down, said his fever's gone, and he wouldn't miss seeing his mom on TV for anything in the world. Time seemed to accelerate. One moment Emily was standing in the familiar comfort of Rosie's diner. The next, she was being guided outside to applause that washed over her like a physical wave. The crowd had swelled beyond anything she could have imagined. Not just regular customers and neighbors, but what seemed like the entire town. On the hastily assembled stage stood the mayor, the general from that morning, and several officials wearing Veterans Affairs pins. A podium draped with the American flag stood at center stage, microphones clustered at its peak like strange metal flowers. Ladies and gentlemen, Mayor Richardson's voice boomed through speakers, today we recognize extraordinary courage and compassion from one of our own. Emily barely heard the words that followed. A recounting of yesterday's events, carefully edited to protect classified details, but emphasizing the significance of her actions. Her eyes scanned the crowd until she found Tyler, perched on Mrs. Henderson's shoulders, his small face beaming with pride despite the pallor of recent illness. When the general stepped forward, the crowd hushed. In his hands gleamed a medal, not military issue, but a civilian honor created for those who served their country without uniform. "Emily Matthews," he announced, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent street, "on behalf of a grateful nation and veterans everywhere, I present you with the Civilian Medal of Honor for exceptional service." The weight of the medal against her palm felt surreal as cameras flashed. Emily stepped to the microphone, her heart hammering. She had prepared no speech, had never imagined addressing a crowd larger than the diner's breakfast rush. "I'm not a hero," she began, her voice catching. "I'm just a waitress and a mom who remembered some nursing classes." She paused, finding Tyler's eyes in the crowd. "But I believe we all have moments where we're called to be more than what we think we are. Table 4 was my moment." Applause erupted again, drowning out anything else she might have said. As Emily stood blinking in the unexpected spotlight, she glimpsed a figure at the back of the crowd, a tall, elderly man leaning on a cane, watching from the shadows. James Sullivan, somehow present despite what she'd been told about his return to the facility. He didn't approach or call attention to himself. He simply raised his hand in a gesture that was part wave, part salute, acknowledgement from one soul to another across a sea of celebration. In that moment, Emily understood that some connections transcend explanation. Some moments of human connection, like what had happened at Table 4, change everything that follows. Emily Matthews sat at her kitchen table, bills spread before her like a map of impossible terrain. The check from the Department of Defense had been deposited, a sum that still didn't feel real, but old habits died hard. She still found herself calculating pennies, planning meals that could stretch to multiple dinners, wondering how long before some new crisis devoured their newfound security. The past week had unfolded like a dream. Newspaper articles featuring her photo appeared on doorsteps throughout town. Customers at Rosie's left extravagant tips with notes of gratitude. The mayor had mentioned a key to the city. Through it all, Emily had continued her shifts, pouring coffee and serving meatloaf specials with the same quiet efficiency as before, though her thoughts often drifted to Table 4, now permanently marked, with a small plaque commemorating what had happened there. Tyler's homework lay abandoned on the counter, his attention captured by a documentary about emergency medicine, his newest fascination since watching his mother receive the civilian medal. "Mum, did you know ambulance workers can give medicine right at the scene?" he called, eyes bright with excitement. His fever had broken completely 2 days after the ceremony, leaving behind a renewed energy and endless questions about his mother's sudden fame. "They're called paramedics, honey," Emily replied, sorting another bill into the paid pile, a satisfaction she'd rarely known before. "They have special training." The phone rang, interrupting their evening routine. Emily glanced at the unfamiliar number on the screen before answering. "Ms. Matthews, this is Dr. Eleanor Reed from Central State University's School of Nursing." The woman's voice was warm, professional. "I'm calling regarding your application. From 3 years ago," Emily's breath caught. "My application? But that expired?" "Ordinarily, yes," Dr. Reed continued. "But these are extraordinary circumstances. I understand you've had a rather eventful week." Through the window, Emily could see the last rays of sunset painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. The same sky that had witnessed her performing CPR on a stranger, not knowing his importance, not calculating the outcome, simply responding to a human being in need with the skills she possessed. "The Veterans Medical Foundation has contacted our program," Dr. Reed explained. "They've established a full scholarship for you. Tuition, books, childcare stipend, even a living allowance." A pause. They were quite insistent that it be offered. To you specifically. Tyler had wandered over, sensing the shift in his mother's energy. Emily reached for his hand as Dr. Reed continued outlining details: flexible scheduling for working parents, accelerated credit for prior coursework, clinical placements that could begin as early as next semester. But why now? Emily found herself asking. It's been years since I applied. Dr. Reed's voice softened. Ms. Matthews, what you did at that diner, that wasn't luck or coincidence. That was skill and instinct and compassion. The Foundation believes those qualities shouldn't be washing dishes or refilling coffee cups. They should be saving lives. After the call ended, Emily sat in stunned silence, the weight of possibility pressing against her chest like a thing. 3 years ago, she'd abandoned her nursing program when Tyler's father left, when survival became more urgent than dreams, when single motherhood demanded sacrifices she made without complaint, but not without cost. Mom, Tyler's voice pulled her back to the present. Are you crying? Emily hadn't realized tears were streaming down her cheeks. She pulled her son into a fierce embrace, breathing in the scent of his shampooed hair, his clean skin, his innocent curiosity. Happy tears, she assured him. Remember how I used to tell you about being a nurse someday? Tyler nodded against her shoulder. You said it was a someday dream. Well, Emily said, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. Someday just arrived. How would you feel about your mom going back to school? Tyler pulled back, his face serious as he considered the question. Then, with the pure wisdom of childhood, he smiled. I think the sick people would be lucky to have you, like that soldier was. Outside their small apartment, the stars had begun to appear in the darkening sky, countless points of light emerging from what had seemed only moments before to be empty space. Emily gazed at them through the window, thinking of James Sullivan and his Purple Heart, of split-second decisions and second chances, of quiet heroism at Table 4 that had somehow redirected the entire course of her life. You know what, buddy? She whispered, still holding her son close. I think we're the lucky ones.